In this video, we are going to talk about the importance of being emotional for our daughters as men, just in general. Also, how and why we're usually programmed not to be emotional, and the effects of being emotional versus not being emotional that our daughters experience, as well as ourselves. So, we're going to break down the whole idea of being emotional as a dad. This is chapter 11 in story time from Daddy, Are You Proud of Me? There's a link that you can go to somewhere around this video. You can go to coachshansmith.com/daddy to check out the book and read it. And I'm going to read you the first paragraph here of this chapter. And you can also send me the receipt of your purchase, and I'm sending people the raw audiobook recordings with much more discussion about the book and add-ons and clarifying questions and all that stuff. I read the book to create my audiobook. That's not even done yet, but I read it to a live studio audience. I don't think it was technically a studio audience. I think I'm just used to hearing a live studio audience. Anyway, I read it in my studio, so I guess it counts. But the recordings and the discussion were really deep. So let me read you this first paragraph here. Chapter 11, Let Her See You Cry. Men who allow themselves to be emotional are much less likely to be controlling, abusive, or lose their tempers. And that's it. A big old exclamation point right there. We are often taught as young boys that crying or any type of vulnerability is a sign of weakness to be avoided at all costs. This couldn't be further from the truth. Emotions are a sign of health. We all have them, and our girls need to see that it's okay to be emotionally expressive. So I'd love to hear your take right out of the gate as you hear me read those words. As a man, if you agree that that's how you were programmed as well. As a daughter, if you saw your father be emotional or stuff his emotions and what the effect was, I think it's a really important conversation. Now, to dads or anybody that's trying to understand dads, I think the programming is really beaten into us from a very early age, because I don't think society is very accepting toward masculine tears, because we think masculinity is supposed to always be tough and gruff and strong, and we think that tears are a sign of weakness. So I remember being told very explicitly from coaches of mine, primarily in sports, to not cry, don't be a pussy, don't be weak, don't be a little girl, all those masculine mantras. And it causes young boys specifically, and I'm not saying that that's unique to only boys. It's the masculine. Now, a lot of girls get that same message because it's in society everywhere, but specifically to young boys, it sends the message that it's not okay to cry. And if we cry, there's going to be consequences. And I believe that the messaging is that those consequences will be abandonment. We will lose our favor inside of our masculine circles, inside the boyhood, inside the manhood, and women won't like us either. So we are essentially taught that everybody's going to leave us if we show up as a weakling. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we stuff our emotions, because we're terrified of being seen as weak. We don't want to be abandoned by our men, and we don't want to not be approved of by women, by everybody, whether we're talking about romantic relationships or friendships or partnerships or whatever. So we get a very clear messaging that it's not okay to cry. And I think it has some really damaging effects. Number one, just the suppression of human emotion is not a good thing. If you imagine a beach ball being held underwater, at some point, your muscles are going to get exhausted and they're going to give out, and that beach ball will come up because it has to. The beach ball cannot stay underwater unless there's constant force, and your body doesn't have enough constant force to keep it underwater forever. So at some point it's coming up. And that's why I said in that first sentence that we will become abusive. We will project our anger. We will erupt on other people, or we will implode on ourselves if we constantly hold in our emotions. So we're going to be a healthier human when we're emotionally expressive. Now, that doesn't mean you always have to cry. Like, crying is not even the big issue here. It's emotional expression. And contrary to what a lot of us think, the more emotionally expressive we are, the more control we have over our emotions. It's when we don't allow ourselves to be emotionally expressive that we actually fear losing control to our emotions. And that's how we suppress them. That's why we stuff them. That's why we're so afraid of them taking over, that we don't have a healthy relationship to our emotions. So in our attempt to control our emotions, we give all of our control to our emotions. And that's how they control us. But we think we're controlling them. We're avoiding them. That's not the same thing. Avoiding emotions and controlling emotions is not the same thing. You can only control something that you have access to. So when you have access to your emotions, then you can actually control them. And there will be situations when crying isn't appropriate, but because you have access to the control of your emotions, you'll be able to not cry in that moment. You'll be able to focus. You'll be able to do all the things that you need to do. From a relational standpoint with our daughters, I think what's really important is that we recognize that we are teaching our daughters what's okay and what's not okay by what we show them, not by what we teach them, but what we show them. So when we don't ever show our daughters emotions, then our daughters quite often will grow up thinking emotions are not okay because daddy never showed them. So I don't want to lose favor with daddy. I want my daddy to be proud of me. And if my daddy never cried, then I better not cry. Even if that's not explicitly said, it's implicitly learned. And then we teach the stuffing of emotions to our daughters, or we teach them to our sons, or we teach them to anybody that's paying attention. And so then we pass on what I believe is an unhealthy programming of emotional stuffing. So it's really important for emotional expression and emotional health to be vulnerable. And again, it doesn't matter that you actually cry. I'm not saying you need to force tears. Some of us don't have tears that we actually need to cry, but we have emotions that we do need to feel. And what I've also learned in all of my years of coaching women and just discussing a lot of these topics is that not just women, but people all around, but specifically, again, in the context of daughters, women actually feel safer with emotionally expressive masculinity. I think there's an element of suspicion at an unconscious level. Like, I know there's got to be some emotion under there, right? When times get tough, I know there's got to be something because I feel it. And sometimes I want to cry. So why are you not crying? Or why are you not expressing, whatever the emotions are? So I think there's an element of suspicion. Whereas when daughters see their fathers cry, from just about everybody that I've ever talked to, they say they actually feel safer than when there aren't any tears. And then there's this self-reassurance that when I have tears, it's also okay, because it was okay for my dad to cry, or it was okay for my dad to get angry and, express it in a healthy way. It was okay for my dad to talk about his emotions, but move through them. So we're showing them how to manage and relate to their own emotions by how we manage and relate to ours. And I think most dads want to give that message to their daughters. But in order to do that, we need to confront or dissolve the programming that we were given about emotions and about masculinity. And I think vulnerable masculinity is not only the safest form of masculinity in terms of other people feeling safe inside of it, but also us feeling safe inside of it and in control inside of it. So I think vulnerable masculinity is not only the safest form of masculinity, but it's also the strongest form of masculinity, because we're not trying to overcompensate for our insecurities. And we get taught so often that, it's all about being tough and being forceful. And that's actually not the strongest kind of masculinity. I believe the strongest kind is the vulnerable, rooted, stable, present masculinity. And you don't give up any of your power by being vulnerable. I think you actually gain more power because you gain more control, you gain more presence, you have the ability to discern a lot more. And so your strength inside of vulnerable masculinity actually expands, but we're taught that it is the opposite. And that's why so many of us men primarily really struggle with our own vulnerable feelings. And it does a lot of damage. It does a lot of damage to ourselves, does a lot of damage to our families, and specifically in the context of the father-daughter relationship, it does a lot of damage to our daughters. So I hope there's something in all of this for you to take out. I'd love to hear your response to any of this. If you disagree, if you do agree, if you have, what if questions, clarifying, whatever you just want to add to the conversation, I'd love for you to add to the conversation. And again, this book is now available on Amazon. It's good to be able to say that after years of it sort of almost sometimes soon being available. You can go to coachseansmith.com/daddy in order to pick it up on Amazon. And there's all kinds of extra resources in here too. There's another website in the back of the book where you can continue the conversation afterwards. And, there's videos and posts and all that stuff to continue the movement. Like I want this to be more of a movement than just a simple, book. But the book has been super helpful for a lot of people that have read it. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, not just on this video, but on this book. And again, if you send me the purchase receipt, I'll send you the raw recordings of the audiobook that we've done. So dads, let them see you cry. I'll talk to you in another video. If you like this video, check out the next video in this series where I continue to share various chapters and break down some of the most important concepts from my new book, Daddy, Are You Proud of Me? What Daughters Need to Hear, See, and Know from Their Dads to Have High Self-Esteem and confidence. At some point in time, that's coming out. So when we are suppressing all of our emotions, we're just setting ourselves up for one of two outcomes. At some point in time,